Good evening, everybody. It's about that time of the week, huh? You know, I got my, I got like big font on. Big font on. I'm going to, take the glasses off. Yep, here we go. I will try to keep this brief. I will try to keep this brief on account of, it's kind of late. And for the tracking to work properly, I have to turn the light on, and that's annoying. So let's sleepy Nintendo music. Yeah, whatever. Tonight we will be reading Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. This is the Project Gutenberg ebook version. Same version at same source as our Wizard of Oz ebook. Let me fix my camera just a little. There we go. So, Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, translated by David Willey. One morning, when Gregor Samsa awoke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. He lay on his armor-like back, and if he lifted his head a little, he could see his brown belly, slightly domed and divided by arches into stiff sections. The bedding was hardly able to cover it, and seemed ready to slide off at any moment. His many legs, pitifully thin compared with the size of the rest of him, waved about helplessly as he looked. You know, this is bothering me. I'm going to plug in a lamp. And this lamp is going to illuminate my face, and I can turn off the lights. Lamp gaming. Yeah. Now I'm going to look away from the screen for a moment. Do not be alarmed, okay? Yeah. All right. I hope you've all had a good day. I sat through a power outage. It was not fun. Now I'm going to look away again for a moment to turn off the lights, all right? Oh, yeah. There we go. Let's see, can I angle this down a bit? Let's calibrate real quick. Yeah, there we go. I recommend getting comfortable. If you are listening to this on mobile, I recommend laying down. Otherwise, I recommend finding a way to make yourself comfortable. Now let's get back to the reading. The bedding was hardly able to cover it, and it seemed ready to slide off at any moment. His many legs, pitifully thin compared with the size of the rest of him, waved about helplessly as he looked. What's happened to me? He thought. It wasn't a dream. His room, a proper human room, although a little too small, lay peacefully between its four familiar walls. A collection of textile samples lay spread out on the table. Samsa was a traveling salesman, and above it there hung a picture that he had recently cut out of an illustrated magazine and housed in a nice gilded frame. It showed a lady fitted with a fur hat and fur boa who sat upright, raising a heavy fur muff that covered the whole of her lower arm towards the viewer. Gregor then turned to look out the window at the dull weather. Drops of rain could be heard hitting the pane, which made him feel quite sad. How about if I sleep a little bit longer and forget all this nonsense, he thought. But that was something he was unable to do because he was used to sleeping on his right, and in his present state he could get into that position. However hard he threw himself onto his right, he always rolled back to where he was. He must have tried it 100 times, shut his eyes so that he wouldn't have to look at the floundering legs, and only stopped when he began to feel a mild, dull pain where he had never felt it before. Oh God, he thought, what a strenuous career it is that I've chosen. Traveling day in and day out, doing business like this takes much more effort than doing your own business at home. And on top of that, there's the curse of traveling. Worries about making train connections, bad and irregular food, contact with different people all the time, so that you can never get to know anyone or become friendly with them. It can all go to hell. He felt a slight itch up on his belly, pushed himself slowly up on his back toward the headboard so that he could lift his head better. Found where the itch was and saw that it was covered in lots of little white spots which he didn't know what to make of. And when he tried to feel the place with one of his legs, he drew it quickly back because as soon as he touched it, he was overcome by a cold shudder. He slid back into his former position. Getting up early all the time, he thought, it makes you stupid. You've got to get enough sleep. Other traveling salesmen live a life of luxury, for instance. Whenever I go back to the guest house during the morning to copy out the contract, these gentlemen are always still sitting there eating their breakfasts. I ought to just try that with my boss. I'd get kicked out on the spot, but who knows? Maybe that would be the best thing for me. If I didn't have my parents to think about, I'd have given in my notice a long time ago. I'd have gone up to the boss and told him that told him what I think. Tell him everything I would let him know just what I feel. He'd fall right off his desk. And it's a funny sort of business to be sitting up there at your desk, talking down to your subordinates from up there. Especially when you have to go right up close. Because the boss is hard of hearing. Well, there's still some hope. Once I've got the money together to pay off my parents' debt to him, another 5 or 6 years I suppose, that's definitely what I'll do. That's when I'll make the big change. Nasai, anata. Gohan mo taberu? Ofuro ni suru? Sore tomo ore ka? Thank you for following XX Obama_gamer XX. That is a very nice username. Thank you. That's when I'll make the big change. First of all, though, I've got to get up. My train leaves at 5. And he looked over at the alarm clock ticking on the chest of drawers. God in heaven, he thought, it was 6:30, and the hands were quietly moving forwards. It was even later than 6:30, more than like 6:45. Had the alarm clock not wrong? He could see from the bed that it had been set for 4 o'clock, as it should have been. It certainly must have rung. Yes, but was it possible to quietly sleep through that furniture rattling noise? True, he had not slept peacefully, but probably all the more deeply because of that. What should he do now? The next train was at 7. If he were to catch that, he would have to rush like mad, and the collection of samples was still not packed. And he did not at all feel particularly fresh and lively, and even if he did catch the train, he would not avoid his boss's anger, as the office assistant would have been there to see the 5 o'clock train go. He would have put in his report that Gregor's not being there a long time ago. There's a fruit fly right there. Let me get out of here. The office assistant was the boss's man, spineless and with no understanding. What about if he reported sick? But that would be extremely strained and suspicious, as in 5 years of service, Gregor has never once yet been ill. His boss would certainly come around with the doctor from the medical insurance company, accuse his parents of having a lazy son, and accept the doctor's recommendation not to make any claim, as the doctor believed that no one was ever ill, but that many were work shy. And what's more, would he have been entirely wrong in this case? Gregor did, in fact, apart from excessive sleepiness after sleeping for so long, feel completely well, and even felt much hungrier than usual. Hang on, I'm scratching my eye. Ooh. It's a very nice night. Let me peep something real quick. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Let's check chat. All right, back to reading. He was still hurriedly thinking all this through, unable to decide to get out of bed when the clock struck 7:15. There was a cautious knock at the door near his head. Gregor? Somebody called. It was his mother. It's 7:15. Didn't you want to go somewhere? That gentle voice. Gregor was shocked when he heard his own voice answering. It could hardly be recognized as the... I'm glad I could be of service to you, Obama_gamer. I apologize that I do not have a proper ASMR mic yet. I'm working to save up to that. But I hope all the same you can go to bed nice and easy. It could hardly be recognized as the voice he had had before, as if from deep inside of him there was a painful and uncontrollable squeaking mixed in with it. The words could be made out at first, but then there was a sort of echo which made them unclear, leaving the hearer unsure whether he had heard properly or not. Gregor had wanted to give a full answer and explain everything, but in the circumstances contented himself with saying, "Yes, mother, yes. Thank you. I'm getting up now." The change in Gregor's voice probably could not be noticed outside through the wooden door, as his mother was satisfied with this explanation and shuffled away. But this short conversation made the other members of the family aware that Gregor, against their expectations, was still at home. And soon his father came knocking at one of the side doors, gently, but with his fist. "Gregor, Gregor," he called, "what's wrong?" And after a short while, he knocked again with a warning deepness in his voice. "Gregor, Gregor," at the other side door his sister came plaintively. "Gregor, aren't you well? Do you need anything?" Gregor answered to both sides, "I'm ready, now," making an effort to remove all the strangeness from his voice by enunciating very carefully and putting long pauses between each individual word. His father went back to his breakfast, but his sister whispered, "Gregor, open the door, I beg of you." Gregor, however, had no thought of opening the door, and instead congratulated himself for this cautious habit, acquired from his traveling, of locking all doors at night, even when he was at home. The first thing he wanted to do was get up in peace, without being disturbed, to get dressed, and most of all to have his breakfast. Only then would he consider what to do next, as he was well aware that he would not bring his thoughts to any sensible conclusions by lying in bed. He remembered that he had often felt a slight pain in bed, perhaps caused by lying awkwardly, but that had always turned out to be pure imagination, and he wondered how his imaginings would slowly resolve themselves today. He did not have the slightest doubt that the change in his voice was nothing more than the first sign of a serious cold, which was an occupational hazard for traveling salesmen. It was a simple matter of to show off. I had a gamer moment there. It was a simple matter to throw off the covers. He only had to blow himself up a little, and they fell off by themselves. But it became difficult after that, especially as he was so exceptionally broad. He would have used his arms and hands to push himself up, but instead of them, he only had those little legs continuously moving in different directions, and which he was moreover unable to control. If he wanted to bend one of them, then that was the first one that would stretch itself out. If he finally managed to do what he wanted with that leg, all the others seemed to be set free and would move about painfully. "This is something that can't be done in bed," Gregor said to himself, "so don't keep trying to do it." The first thing he wanted to do was to get the lower part of his body out of the bed. But he had never seen his lower part. He could not imagine what it looked like. It turned out to be too hard to move. It went so slowly and finally almost in a frenzy when he carelessly shoved himself forwards with all the force he could gather. He chose the wrong direction, hit hard against the lower bedpost, and learned from the burning pain he felt that the lower part of his body might well, at present, be the most sensitive. So then, he tried to get the top part of his body out of the bed first. Carefully turning his head to the side, he managed quite easily and despite his breadth and its weight. The bulk of his body eventually followed slowly in the direction of his head. But when he had at last got his head out of the bed and into the fresh air, it occurred to him that if he let himself fall, it would be a miracle if his head were not injured. So he became afraid to carry on pushing himself forward the same way. And then he could not knock himself out, and he could not knock himself now at any price. Better to stay in bed than lose consciousness. It took just as much effort to get back to where he had been earlier, but when he lay there sighing and was once more watching his legs as they struggled against each other even harder than before, if that was possible, he could think of no way of bringing peace and order to this chaos. He told himself once more that it was not possible for him to stay in bed, and that the most sensible thing to do would be to get free of it in whatever way he could at whatever sacrifice. At the same time, though, he did not forget to remind himself that calm consideration was much better than rushing at desperate conclusions. At times like this, he would direct his eyes to the window and look out as clearly as he could, but unfortunately, even the other side of the narrow street was enveloped in morning fog, and the view had little confidence or cheer to offer him. 7 o'clock already, he said to himself when the clock struck again. 7 o'clock, and there's still a fog like this. And he lay there quietly a while longer, breathing lightly as if he perhaps expected the total stillness to bring things back to their real and natural state. Sorry, I need to sip my coffee. Let's get that squared away. But then he said to himself, before it strikes 7:15, I'll definitely have to have my property out of bed. I will definitely have to have got properly out of bed. Sorry, I'm having a no glasses moment, you know? Hang on, I need to scratch my nose. And by then, somebody will have come round from work to ask what's happened to me as well, as they open up at work before 7 o'clock. And so he set himself to the task of swinging the entire length of his body out of the bed all at the same time. If he succeeded in falling out of bed in this way, he kept his head raised as he did, so he... Thank you. Falling out of bed this way and kept his head raised as he did, so he could probably avoid injuring it. His back seemed to be quite hard, and probably nothing would happen to it falling on to the carpet. His main concern was for the loud noise he was bound to make, and which, even though all the doors would probably, and which even through all the doors would probably raise concern if not alarm. Alright, I'm having like glasses off moments, so I need to put these back on. Sorry. Alright, so let's get those back on. I took those off to improve eye tracking, so it would stop like winking. There we go. Let's get that visual indicator back up. Yep, here we go. Yep, that's pinned to the wrong part. Oh. How do I rotate this? Fuck. Let's just get a new one out. This is the part where I have to do technical maintenance right in the middle of the stream. Alright, good. That's pinned to the right part. Let's do a quick recal. You know what? That's as good as it's gonna get. I just noticed that during some mouth forms, the inside's clipping out. I need to fix my model at some point. But it was something that had to be risked. When Gregor was already sticking halfway out of the bed, the new method was more of a game than an effort. All he had to do was rock back and forth and back and forth. It occurred to him how simple everything would be if somebody came to help him, two strong people. He had his father and the maid in mind. Would have been more than enough. They would only have to push their arms under the dome of his back, peel him away from the bed, bend down with the load, and then be patient and careful as he swang over onto the floor, where hopefully the little legs would find a use. Should he really call for help, though? Even apart from the fact that all the doors were locked? Despite all the difficulty he was in, he could not suppress the smile at this thought. Ugh. After a while, he had already moved so far across that it would have been hard for him to keep his balance if he rocked too hard. The time was now 7:10, and he would have to make a final decision very soon. Then there was a ring at the door of the flat. That'll be someone from work, he said to himself, and froze very still, although his little legs only became all the more lively as they danced around. For a moment, everything remained quiet. They're not opening the door, Gregor said to himself, caught in some nonsensical hope. But then, of course, the maid's firm steps went to the door as ever and opened it. Gregor only needed to hear the visitor's first words of greetings, and he knew who it was, the chief clerk himself. Why did Gregor have to be the only one condemned to work for a company where they immediately became highly suspicious at the slightest shortcoming? Were all employees, every one of them, louts? Was there not one of them who was faithful and devoted, would go so mad with pangs of conscience that he couldn't get out of bed if he didn't spend at least a couple of hours in the morning on company's business? Was it really not enough to let one of the trainees make inquiries? Assuming inquiries are even necessary, did the chief clerk have to come himself? And did they have to show the whole innocent family that this was so suspicious that only the chief clerk could be trusted to have the wisdom to investigate it? And more because these thoughts had made him upset than through any proper decision, he swung himself with all his force out of the bed. There was a loud thump, but it wasn't really a loud noise. His fall was softened a little by the carpet. Oh? Who's pinging me? Oh, it's just something very minor. You don't have to worry about it. Why am I tabbing around? I need to get back. I need to get back on track. I need to focus. All right, let's see. His fall was softened a little by the carpet, and Gregor's back was also more elastic than he had thought, which made the sound muffled and not too noticeable. He had not held his head carefully enough, though, and hit it as he fell. Annoyed and in pain, he turned and rubbed it against the carpet. "Something's fallen down in there," said the chief clerk, in the room on the left. Gregor tried to imagine whether something of this sort had happened to him today. Could ever happen to the chief clerk too? You had to concede that it was possible, but as if in gruff reply to his question, the chief clerk's firm footsteps in his highly polished boots could now be heard in the adjoining room. From the room on his right, Gregor's sister whispered to him to let him know. "Gregor, the chief clerk is here." "Yes, I know," said Gregor to himself, but without daring to raise his voice loud enough for his sister to hear him. "Gregor," said his father, now from the room to his left, "the chief clerk has come around and wants to know why you didn't leave on the early train. We don't know what to say to him, and anyway, he wants to speak to you personally. So please open up this door. I'm sure he'll be good enough to forgive the untidiness of your room." Then the chief clerk called, "Good morning, Mr. Samsa." "He isn't well," said his mother to the chief clerk, while his father continued to speak through the door. "He isn't well, please believe me. Why else would Gregor have missed the train? The lad only ever thinks about the business. It nearly makes me cross the way he never goes out in the evenings. He's been in town for a week now, but stayed home every evening. He sits with us in the kitchen and just reads the paper for studies. Train timetables. His idea of relaxation is working with his fret saw. He's made a little frame, for instance. It only took him 2 or 3 evenings, but you'll be amazed how nice it is. It's hanging up in his room. You'll see it as soon as Gregor opens the door. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. We wouldn't have been able to get Gregor to open the door by ourselves. He's so stubborn. And I'm sure he isn't well. He said this morning that he is, but he isn't." "I'll be there in a moment," said Gregor slowly and thoughtfully, but without moving so that he would not miss any word of the conversation. Hang on, I'm having a little bit of a nose moment. You know when, like, for no reason your nose gets all stuffy, and it makes no sense that for it to be stuffy at this time. By all means, you should have a perfectly clear nose, but it's just stuffy for no reason. That's the worst. "Well, I can't think of any other way of explaining it, Mrs. Samsa," said the chief clerk. "I hope it's nothing serious. But on the other hand, I must say that if we people in commerce ever become slightly unwell, then, fortunately or unfortunately as you like, we simply have to overcome it because of business considerations." "Can the chief clerk come in to see you then?" asked his father impatiently, knocking on the door again. "No," said Gregor. In the room on his right, there followed a painful silence. In the room on his left, his sister began to cry. So why did his sister not go in and join the others? She probably only just got up and had not even begun to get dressed. And why was she crying? Was it because he had not got up? and had not let the chief clerk in because he was in danger of losing his job, and if that happened, his boss would once more pursue their parents with the same demands as before. There was no need to worry about things like that yet. Gregor was still there and had not the slightest intention of abandoning his family. For the time being, he just lay there on the carpet, and no one who knew the condition he was in would seriously have expected him to let the chief clerk in. It was only a minor discourtesy, and a suitable excuse could easily be found for it later on. It was not something for which Gregor could be sacked on the spot, and it seemed to Gregor much more sensible to leave him now in peace, instead of disturbing him and talking at him and crying. But the others didn't know what was happening. They were worried that would excuse their behavior. The chief clerk now raised his voice. "Mr. Samsa," he called to him, "what is wrong? You barricade yourself in your room. Give us no more than yes or no for an answer. You are causing serious and unnecessary concern to your parents, and you fail, and I mention this just by the way, you fail to carry out your business duties in a way that is quite unheard of. I'm speaking here on behalf of your parents and of your employer, and really must request a clear and immediate explanation. I'm astonished, quite astonished. I thought I knew you as a calm and sensible person, and now you suddenly seem to be showing off with peculiar whims. This morning your employer did suggest a possible reason for your failure to appear. It's true it had to do with the money that was recently entrusted to you, but I came near to giving him my word of honor that could not be the right explanation. But now that I see your incomprehensible stubbornness, I no longer feel any wish whatsoever to intercede on your behalf. And nor is your position all that secure. I had initially intended to say all this to you in private, but since you caused me to waste my time here for no good reason, I don't see why your parents should not also learn of it. Your turnover has been very unsatisfactory as of late. I grant you that it's not the time of year to do especially good business. We recognize that. But there simply is no time of year to do no business at all, Mr. Samsa. We cannot allow there to be. But, sir, called Gregor, beside himself and forgetting all else in the excitement, I'll open up immediately. Just a moment. I'm slightly unwell. An attack of dizziness. I haven't been able to get up. I'm still in bed now. I'm quite fresh again now. Though I'm just getting out of bed. Just a moment. Be patient. It's not quite as easy as I'd thought. I'm quite all right now, though. It's shocking what can suddenly happen to a person. I was quite all right last night. My parents know about it, perhaps better than me. I had a small symptom of it last night already. They must have noticed it. But I don't know why I didn't let you know at work. But you always think you can get over an illness without staying at home. Please, don't make my parents suffer. There's no basis for any of the accusations you're making. Nobody's ever said a word to me about any of these things. Maybe you haven't read the latest contracts I sent in. I'll set off with the 8 o'clock train. As well, these few hours of rest have given me strength. You don't need to wait, sir. I'll be in the office soon after you. And please be so good as to tell that to the boss and to recommend me to him. And while Gregor gushed out these words, hardly knowing what he was saying, he made his way over to the chest of drawers. This was easily done, probably because of the practice he had already had in bed, where he now tried to get himself upright. He really did want to open the door, really did want to let them see him and to speak with the chief clerk. The others were being so insistent, and he was curious to learn what they would say when they caught sight of him. If they were shocked, then it would no longer be Gregor's responsibility and he could rest. If, however, they took everything calmly, he would still have no reason to be upset. And if he hurried, he really could be at the station for 8 o'clock. The first few times he tried to climb up on the smooth chest of drawers, he just slid down again. But he finally gave himself one last swing and stood there upright. The lower part of his body was in serious pain, but he no longer gave any attention to it. Now he let himself fall against the back of a nearby chair and held tightly to the edges of it with his little legs. By now he had also calmed down and kept quiet so that he could listen to what the chief clerk was saying. Did you understand a word of all that? The chief clerk asked his parents. Surely he's not trying to make fools of us. Oh God, called his mother, who was already in tears. He could be seriously ill and we're making him suffer. Grete, Grete, she cried. Mother, his sister called from the other side. They communicated across Gregor's room. You'll have to go for the doctor straight away. Gregor is ill. Quick, get the doctor. Did you hear the way Gregor spoke just now? That was the voice of an animal, said the chief clerk, with a calmness that was in contrast to his mother's screams. Anna, Anna, his father called into the kitchen through the entrance hall, clapping his hands. Get a locksmith here now. And the two girls, their skirts swishing, immediately ran out through the hall, wrenching open the front door of the flat as they went now. How had his sister managed to get dressed so quickly? There was no sound of the door banging shut again. They must have left it open. People often do in homes where not something awful has happened. Gregor, in contrast, had become much calmer, so they couldn't understand his words anymore. Although they seemed clear enough to him, clearer than before, perhaps his ears had become used to the sound. They had realized, though, that there was something wrong with him, and were ready to help. The first response to his situation would have been confident and wise, and that made him feel better. He felt that he had been drawn back in among people, and from the doctor and the locksmith he expected great and surprising achievements, although he did not really distinguish one from the other. Whatever was said next would be crucial, so in order to make his voice as clear as possible, he coughed a little, but taking care to do so not too loudly, as even this might well sound different from the way that a human coughs, and he was no longer sure he could judge this for himself. Meanwhile, it had become very quiet in the next room. Perhaps his parents were sat at the table whispering with the chief clerk, or perhaps they were all pressed against the door and listening. Gregor slowly pushed his way over to the door with the chair. Once there, he let go of it and threw himself onto the door, holding himself upright against it. Using the adhesive on the tips of his legs, he rested there a while to recover from the effort involved, and he set himself to the task of turning the key in the lock with his mouth. He seemed, unfortunately, to have no proper teeth. How was he, then, to grasp the key? But the lack of teeth was, of course, made up for with a very strong jaw. Using this jaw, he really was able to turn the key, start the key turning, ignoring the fact that he must have been causing some kind of damage as a brown fluid came from his mouth, flowed over the key, and dripped to the floor. Listen, said the chief clerk in the next room. He's turning the key. Gregor was greatly encouraged by this. But they all should have been calling to him, his father and his mother too. Well done, Gregor. They should have cried, keep at it, keep hold of the lock. And with an idea that they were all excitedly following his efforts, he bit on the key with all his strength, paying no attention to the pain he was causing himself. As the key turned, and he turned around the lock with it, only holding himself upright with his mouth, he hung onto the key and pushed it down again, the whole weight of his body as needed. The clear sound of the lock as it snapped back was Gregor's sign that he could break his concentration. And as he regained his breath, he said to himself, "So I didn't need the locksmith after all." Then he lay his head on the handle of the door and opened it completely. Because he had to open the door this way, it was already wide open before he could be seen. He had first to slowly turn himself around on one of the double doors, and he had to do it very carefully if he did not want to fall flat on his back before entering the room. He was still occupied with this difficult movement, unable to pay attention to anything else. When he heard the chief clerk exclaim aloud, "Oh!" which sounded like a soughing of the wind. Hang on, let's listen to this.
Sough.
Yeah, soughing of the wind. I'm sorry if that was extremely loud. So, which sounded like a soughing of the wind. Now, he also saw him. He was the nearest to the door, his hand pressed against his open mouth and slowly retreating as if driven by a steady and invisible force. Gregor's mother, her hair still disheveled from bed, despite the chief clerk being there, looked at his father. Then she unfolded her arms, took 2 steps forward towards Gregor, and sank down onto the floor into her skirts that spread themselves out around her as her head disappeared down into her breast. His father looked hostile and clenched his fists as if wanting to knock Gregor back into his room. Then he looked uncertainly around the living room, covered his eyes with his hands, and wept so that his powerful chest shook. My throat is starting to hurt a lot, so unfortunately I must turn in for the night. I believe there may be at least one new viewer from this, so I'll quickly get into my self-introduction before I wrap up for the night and ship you off to a channel I watch very frequently. So for those of you who are new here, I am Roger D. Cheeto Jr. I am a homunculus VTuber. I do a variety of games, though I have a particular penchant for RPG games. I like to think of myself as having the vibe of like a big brother, and that's what I aim to portray through my actions here. If you would like to follow me, you can do so on Twitter. Allow me to quickly punch in the usual suspects for getting people funneled into the good stuff, as we in the business like to call it. So, exclamation point. Socials should be the one. Yes, there we go. Drop by the YouTube to get the VODs afterwards. I try to stream 3 days a week and then both days of the weekend. I will have a schedule prepped after this for the next week. It is 9:56 p.m. Central Standard Time. It is a good time. If you have not had dinner yet, it is a good time to do so, and you should go get something to eat, get something to drink. We will be rating Barry Gelatina, who's in the middle of a Jump King challenge where she tries to not scream. It is an ASMR challenge, and thus it is a good content to transition into. Make sure you get at least 7 hours of sleep a night. 8 would be preferable, but sometimes that's not always doable. Beat your dick like it owes you money. Love yourself, and try to get a good night's rest tonight. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good night.